Now, Marcy has been a fan-favorite character ever since her first actual appearance in the show and the episode Marcy at the Gates. But just as soon as all the Marcy love started coming in, there were theories about whether Marcy is actually reliable, whether we can actually trust her. Now, we know quite a bit about Marcy by this point. We know that she's intelligent, we know that she's clever and quick-witted, but we also know that she is prone to monomaniac tendencies. If you don't know what that means, it's basically the opposite of megalomania. Megalomania is like, oh, I want to take over the world, I have very broad ambitions, whereas monomaniac tendencies mean that you focus so heavily on one thing that you don't really consider the world outside that one thing, which, yeah, that's Marcy. When she's so convinced that she's right, and when she's so convinced that what she's doing has value, she can ignore the consequences of her actions on other people. So we have to ask ourselves if we can trust Marcy, if she is as reliable as she appears. Now, there are two basic elements to this question. Number one, is Marcy being played by someone else? And number two, is Marcy playing Anne, and by extension, us the viewers? Now, the answer to the first question is certainly yes. I think that's pretty clear by this point now that we know King Andreas' machinations. The answer to the second question is not quite as clear. I lean towards saying no, but I want to reserve the right to change my opinion on this as we get more information about Marcy. During her time in Amphibia, Marcy has become a loyal soldier of King Andreas. Likely, she does not suspect that he is secretly a cruel leader who is the slave to a bug creature that looks like it's from another world. But she still listens to King Andreas, and she never suspects him of wrongdoing. Marcy is the one who takes them through the temple. She's the one who does a lot of the research. Marcy is the intellectual leader of the group, and she's mostly following Andreas's instructions and ideas. We see the green light fading from her eyes at the end of the first temple episode. And this implies that the energy that flows through her is the same energy as the energy that flows through the gem. They're one and the same. Thus, Marcy has been tricked by this quest, and by extension, been tricked by King Andreas into surrendering her gem power. Now, it is interesting that despite Marcy's penchant for research, she did not foresee this. She did not foresee that she would lose her power by powering up the gem. Perhaps she doesn't even know her power exists, or perhaps she's so completely one-dimensionally focused on getting home and powering up these gems in the Calamity Box that she doesn't even think about the repercussions of her actions. She doesn't think about how it could drain her of her power. That does fit Marcy. She is very much a person who is prone to ignoring the outside world in order to focus on the task that is immediately important to her. Also, I would like to consider this development from King Andreas' point of view. Marcy is one of the most important warriors that King Andreas has on his side. Why does he want to depower a person who, number one, is definitely on his side, and number two, someone who could be an important ally to him if circumstances turn wild and the country starts collapsing? I suppose my answer would be that Andreas foresees that Marcy is going to turn on him once she learns the truth. So Andreas wants to deprive her of her power as soon as possible, so that when she does turn against Andreas, she's not as powerful. How does Andreas see Marcy as a whole? Likely as nothing more than a pawn. Literally, as a chess pawn, judging by his strange board, wherein Marcy and Anne are just chess pieces. It's also interesting to view this in the context of Marcy's chess game. Yes, I know it's not technically chess. It's a utopian variant of such, but it's close enough that I don't think calling it chess is obfuscatory. I think it pretty much presents the general idea. Chess is a game for strategists. Marcy is a strategist. She is drawn to this kind of game. It's not surprising that she's quite good at it. But she's also caring and compassionate. During the temple episode, she is initially blinded by her drive to win, but when she sees the damage she's causing to those she loves, she pulls back and gives up, which draws a nice contrast between her and Andreas, as Andreas is not humanistic. He doesn't care about people. He just cares about his overarching goals. Because of this, it's perhaps right to think that Marcy is not going to intentionally betray Anne. She cares a lot for Anne. She bears Anne no ill will. If she does betray Anne, it's going to be unintentionally, most likely. Also, if she knew what was happening, I highly doubt she would have drained herself of power. That doesn't make sense, even from a self-interest point of view. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I'm not entirely supportive of the borderline conspiratorial view that a lot of people have toward Marcy. I'm not saying that there aren't more layers to Marcy than we have hitherto seen, but the suspicion that so many people have toward her seems rather unnecessary and unjustified. We've gotten to spend a lot of time with Marcy as she's hung around Anne and the Planters, and she seems to really be as earnest and genuinely passionate as she appears to be. Still, does that necessarily mean that Marcy is innocent? I'm not sure I'd go that far. While I don't doubt that she doesn't have any malice in her heart, I also believe that she knows a little more than she lets on. Again, she cares about Anne, she's compassionate toward Anne, but she can become so focused on one objective that she does not see the broader implications of her monomaniac pursuit. Think about the first temple episode. She doesn't notice at first that her actions are hurting her friends because she's so committed to solving these puzzles and completing their quest. If it is true, as some people allege it is, that Marcy doesn't want to leave Amphibia because she has a much higher status here than she does back home, I don't think that is entirely dissonant with how she has hitherto been characterized. Marcy could care about Anne and want to help Anne, but get sidetracked by her intense focus on wanting to stay here in Amphibia and not consider the implications of that desire on someone like Anne, who really does want to go home. I don't think that Marcy is a villain. We know enough about her that the idea that she is a villain seems very far-fetched. Nonetheless, she could still undertake villainous actions unintentionally, actions that hurt those around her. Again, think about the first temple. Does she want to hurt Anne in the Planters? No, not at all. Quite the opposite. But she doesn't take notice or care about the effects she's having on the Planters at first, because she's just so committed to solving the puzzle. She gets in the zone, and everyone else kind of fades away. When she's in the zone, she's alone. Other people don't matter. She doesn't even really think about them. It's just her and her objective. I'd still like to venture that we don't know quite enough about Marcy at this point to make a real moral judgment about her. We've seen Anne and Sasha at their lowest, when they've just been crushed by the weight of this world, but the same can't really be said of Marcy. When we've seen her, she's tended to be floating off in her own little world, kind of oblivious to what's happening. This doesn't mean that we haven't seen her mad or anxious or worried, but we haven't seen her truly desperate and despondent. We haven't seen her have to make a really difficult decision, like we saw with Anne and Sasha at the end of last season. If she did get into such a difficult situation, what would she do? How will she behave when she's alone and she's really feeling desperate? We don't know enough about her to properly say how she would behave in those circumstances. We'll just have to wait and see. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, don't forget to comment, don't forget to subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. Keep watching Amphibia, it's a smart show and I can't wait to see where it goes from here. And I can't wait to see what it does with Marcy. She's a really interesting character and I'd love to see what Anne will think of her and say to her if Marcy starts engaging in a little more questionable behavior. Marcy cares about Anne and Anne cares about Marcy, that's true, but that doesn't mean tragedy can't come between them. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank y'all again. Adios, comrades.